17 days after an assault by Hamas militants on Israel's settlements, that Israel has been continuously bombarding Gaza with the aim of rooting out the militants. To get an update on the latest development in Gaza and efforts to put an end to the continuing violence, particularly by the Israeli forces, we are now connected with Dr. Dalal Iriqat, Assistant Professor of Diplomacy and Conflict Resolutions, Arab American University in Palestine. Good afternoon there, Dr. Dalal. Thank you for joining us today. We would like to know, based on your observation, how long do you think it will be the Israel bombardment will last? And will it continue until Hamas militants and forces be crippled then?
Well, thank you very much. Let me allow me please to start with your audiences with putting the right framing of what's happening. What's happening is not a war between Netanyahu and Hamas. This is not a war between Israel and Gaza. This is a systematic war crimes, series of war crimes against 2.2 million Palestinian civilians who live in Gaza. This is basically a war that Israel is waging against the Palestinian right to self-determination. The fact that we had seen military orders of evictions and forced displacements and collective punishment against the 2 million civilians in Gaza is the biggest proof that we are witnessing a translation of the deal of the century, where Israel, of course, is a beneficiary by the continuation of their settler colonial project that has been going for so long. Gaza had been suffering for 16 years under a totally deadly blockade under the Israeli control. People in Gaza were deprived from the basic needs: no water, no food, no hope for life. 1 million of the population in Gaza are children. Children are under the fire of the Israeli military occupation, continued war crimes, which are unfortunately enjoying impunity. The world is unfortunately implicit in those war crimes against humanity in Gaza. The world and the international community had been covering and providing legal cover to the Israeli war crimes, let alone 75 years under the Israeli military occupation of different kinds of racism, different crimes of apartheid, extrajudicial killings in the Palestinian streets, detentions, confiscations of land, settlements, and very recently we have the fear and the danger of the settler terror, not only in Gaza, in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem. Every Palestinian is target. So please, let us not adopt the Israeli narrative of framing what is happening as if it is a war between Netanyahu and Hamas. This is totally not true. And I'm not here to defend Hamas by any means, but we want to stand for humanity. We want to stand for the 2.2 million Palestinian civilians who are under the Israeli fire, while the diplomatic community and the international community is now calling for the exchange, the release of the hostages. Yes, we want a release of the hostages, but the first priority should be the ceasefire. 1 million children are under the Israeli fire. No fuel, no water, no food, no medicine, no electricity. 130 babies are in incubators. They are at the threat of death at any minute. If the strip, is short in electricity, with the fact that they are living without even water or food or bread, no hope, the viruses, the sicknesses, the illness, the hospitals are now, mass graves, where people have resorted for refuge. Tens of thousands of people have sought refuge in hospitals or in UNRWA schools, while Israel is bombing every residential area, is bombing every hospital, mosques and churches. We have seen documented crimes against Al-Ma'badani hospital, which is an Anglican hospital in Gaza. We have seen also a targeting of a church in Gaza. Israel is violating every single article of the international humanitarian law. Article 49 grants the Palestinian people protection. So there is an immediate need for the international world leaders to call for ceasefire, immediate ceasefire, because 2 million civilians are suffering under the Israeli fire while we are all watching on the screens. It is not okay that we are still adopting the Israeli narrative of Israel waging a war against Hamas. That's not how you wage a war against Hamas. That's not how you eradicate Hamas. It's not through killing the kids and the elderly and the homes and the hospitals and the churches. You want to convince me that Israel, with its all military might and with all technological advancement, it is the startup nation of the Middle East, that Silicon Valley of the Middle East. They cannot cannot locate the locations of the Hamas military bases. They have to eradicate and shell and drop missiles and target with their fire on continuous base the million children, the residential homes, the neighborhoods, the schools, the hospitals, the mosques. This should not be okay with the world. Humanity had failed the Palestinians in Gaza, and diplomacy had big time failed the Palestinians in Gaza. It's about time we speak the truth, that civilians in Gaza should not be the victims. It is not okay that we live in 2023 and that we are witnessing those war crimes against 1 million children, 2 million civilians living in Gaza. For what? For the pretext and the narration and the misleading of the world that Israel is using in their war against terror. That's not how you fight terror. That's not how you eliminate Hamas. It's not by killing and by forcibly displacing 2 million civilians.
Right. There should no be victim, as you mentioned also, and as you highlighted also, we stand for humanity. So what measures should be taken in an effort to put the Israeli bombardment to an end then, you think?
Well, I believe, because I'm a professor of diplomacy and international law, we need to abide by international law, international humanitarian law, and the UN Charter, which basically means we need to start by ending the Israeli military occupation. We need to end the Israeli crimes against humanity. You know, those Israeli war criminals and military leaders, they need to be held accountable in the international courts of justice, at the ICC, and the ICJ. There is a call, you know, I'm now calling and urging through you just to implement and to stick to the universal values of the Palestinians being equal human beings. Every human should be treated as equal, whether it is a human in Tel Aviv, in Herzliya, in Jakarta, in China, in New York, in Paris, or in Gaza. The main message that we should be conveying to everybody today, that a Palestinian human is a human at the end of the day, and we should be treated equally. Israel must be held accountable, and a ceasefire must be implemented immediately. There should be no negotiations over ceasefire. 2.2 million civilians are under Israeli fire, and the war crimes are documented on the screens. Yet, the Israelis continue with their propaganda, they continue with their hasbara, they continue with spinning the reality. They are still trying to convince, through, I'm sorry to say that, but it's through the Western media bias, to label the Palestinians, you know, the millions of civilians, as terrorists. This is not okay. Palestinians deserve life, and they deserve to be treated as human beings. They are not terrorists. They are people who have suffered 5 wars in the past 15 years. Israel has been waging more and more crimes and wars against the children, against the women, against the elderly. Those people who want a decent life, you know, the normal standards of a human living, they were deprived from the basic human needs. You know that they don't even enjoy internet Wi-Fi services. The best case scenario is 2G services in Gaza. This should not be okay. And this was a deliberate, you know, decision by the Israelis to deprive them even from the communication tools. They cannot, you know, move. They cannot work. They cannot go for education. They don't have proper food or medicine or, you know, infrastructure. They have been cut off from the world. How do you eliminate terror, and how do you prepare a new generation for peace and coexistence? By waging more and more wars against the civilians. Those people are human beings, and they deserve to be treated equally. It is not okay that the world leaders are adopting the rhetoric of saying we stand by Israel. Why don't you stand with the civilians in general, whether it is a Muslim, Christian, or Jewish? People should be, and civilians should be treated equally. Nobody should be okay with fire against civilians. This is the message that we want to convey. The millions of Palestinian civilians under fire, under Israeli war crimes in Gaza, should not be justified and should not be tolerated. An immediate ceasefire is requested. The humanitarian aid should be immediate, and those people should be enjoying their needs of food and medicine and electricity and fuel. They need the minimum needs of any human being. The fact that the whole world is still adopting the rhetoric of the Israelis, the Israeli propaganda, it is very much misleading. And I really hope that our message of humanity and justice will prevail, because Palestinians really deserve independence, dignity, and freedom. For the past 75 years, we have been suffering all different kinds of discrimination and racism and the crimes of apartheid. It is not okay that the world is practicing a pragmatic win-win scenario at the expense of the Palestinian blood, at the expense of Palestinian right of self-determination. We are a people who deserve our basic rights, not only our religious rights, but also our political and civil rights. We will continue to tell the truth. And I urge every media outlet and every, conscious human being to just tell the truth. We want to tell the truth. Israel is waging a war against the truth. It's waging a war, a digital war, actually, against anybody who speaks the truth. It is waging a war against all humanitarian organizations and international human rights organizations. Even the Israeli human rights organizations are suffering from the Israeli propaganda. It is not okay. And I urge everybody to look at the Palestinians as civilians. It is not time that we stand for humanity and justice. Everything is documented and the truth should not be covered anymore.
Okay, now let's see. Unless support from US and big European countries for Israel actions on Gaza be withdrawn, the bombardment will continue. Do you agree with that, or do you have any other, more effective measures to actually end this conflict or Israel's actions?
Well, it's about time we resort to wisdom. The root causes of what we are witnessing, did not start on the 9th of October. It's a 75 years of Israeli military prolonged occupation. And we should start there. We should start by ending the Israeli occupation. And let me tell you one thing. The international community is still advocating for the two-state solution. The Palestinians had accepted and made concessions over 78% of mandated Palestine. The PLO, which is the sole representative for the Palestinian people, accepted 22% of mandated Palestine in their will and expression to bring about peace for the two peoples and prosperity in the region. After 30 years of negotiations, we only had a lip service of a peace process where we found ourselves 3 decades later with an entrenched military occupation. We live in small ghettos that are surrounded by settlements. The number of settlers had tripled to 750,000 settlers who are armed, weaponized, and they are practicing terror against the Palestinian civilians. The peace process and the negotiations, unfortunately, have covered and entrenched the existing military occupation. The fact that the international community is still advocating for the two-state solution while not recognizing the Palestinian state raises questions. If they don't want to recognize the Palestinian state, my message today is that they have to at least define and draw the border of the state of Israel. This state has been recognized for 75 years. It is not okay under international law that a state doesn't have a defined border. If they define the border of the state of Israel, then automatically we will end up with an end to the Israeli occupation, and we will also grant the Palestinians the freedom, the dignity, and their right to self-determination in statehood. It is time that the international community, that diplomacy applies international law. And let me also reiterate Article 25 of the UN Charter, which basically obliges the UN member states to respect and enforce all the UN resolutions, Security Council resolutions, and General Assembly resolutions. And here I want to name 2334, 338, 242, and 194. The Palestinians' rights of return, of land, of dignity, of sovereignty are embedded in the UN resolutions. It's about time we walk the talk. It is not okay that everybody keeps using soft language and a very nice rhetoric. Lip servicing the Palestinian people have been ongoing for a long, long time. The Palestinian people are fed up. We are dismayed by the diplomatic discourse, although we're very much fans of a diplomatic tool, a civilized tool, peaceful and legal tool. Yes, it's about time in 2023 that justice must prevail and the international law must be applied on every international party on equal basis. It is not okay that Israel is being treated above all laws, while Israel is violating every international humanitarian law, every UN resolution. It is still enjoying impunity as it perpetrates its war crimes against the civilians. This is not okay. World leaders should hear the words of their own populations. We have been witnessing the protests and the demonstrations all around the world, in all capitals. And here I salute the people of every country for standing for humanity, for standing for the Palestinian civilians under fire. It's about time that those leaders listen to their public opinion, and this should be reflected in their foreign policy, in stopping this wars against humanity in Palestine, in ending the Israeli military occupation, and in granting the Palestinians their freedom, as they have been struggling for 75 years under a prolonged military occupation, which everybody must be calling for an end now. Let us not get distracted from the general framework that Israel is implementing a settler colonial project. They want to evict the Palestinian people, and they want to eradicate our right to self-determination at the expense of the Palestinian blood. This should not be okay.
Okay, we've come to our final questions. Now, we see the Rafah crossing now has been opened. How effective do you think with this all humanitarian aids in helping the isolated Gazas? And perhaps you could also share in a brief summary, perhaps, like how long do you think the situations will come back to normal again?
Unfortunately, again, diplomacy had failed the 2 million Palestinian civilians who are still under fire. An immediate ceasefire is requested immediately. Humanitarian aid is also a priority. And now we are talking about the trucks and the humanitarian aid. It is shameful that in 24 hours, we had witnessed all military aid goes into Israel, financial aid and military weaponry aid, while it took the international community more than 2 weeks in begging and trying to convince Netanyahu and the war criminals to permit humanitarian assistance to the Palestinians. Thanks to the humanitarian assistance, yet we have to be aware and you have to be conscious that 20 or 30 trucks of foods and medicines are not enough. People need continued, non-stop humanitarian aid of food, medicine, water, and fuel. Hospitals are under the risk of not operating. They don't have anesthesia. Doctors are operating in corridors. Tens of thousands of people are in the hallways of the hospitals. Viruses have spread. The smell of blood is everywhere. Hospitals have been turned into grave masses. The WHO had specified that every human needs at least 10 liters of water per day. The Palestinians, if the trucks go on continuously, they will be getting 15 milliliters per person per day. This should not be okay. This is, below the it's very inhumane. What we are witnessing an inhumane, historic catastrophe. And unfortunately, that is being documented on every screen. I urge everybody to just speak the truth and speak justice to the Palestinian people who have suffering and who have endured the Israeli military occupation and all its scenes of apartheid, racism, killings, detentions, and settler terror. This should not be okay. And I urge everybody to call for an immediate ceasefire. The Palestinian civilians in Gaza are depending on us, the conscious people who should be telling the truth based on universal humanitarian values rather than interests.
Dr. Dalal Iriqat, Assistant Professor of Diplomacy and Conflict Resolutions, Arab American University in Palestine. Thank you once again for being with us today on Focus Today on TVRI World. Thank you.
Thank you very much.